We have a big update in the search for a killer. We now know the murder weapon law enforcement say was used in the murder at Burning Man. What it could tell us about the killer who left this man in a pool of blood at the famous arts festival that sprouts out of the desert, attracting tens of thousands of people that has since disappeared. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. It appears there is a lot working against law enforcement in solving this murder that happened at Burning Man. Think about where it happened. In a desert, in a tent city that has since disappeared. On top of that, no cell service, so videos are kind of coming in sporadically since the festival has ended. But it appears law enforcement has a critical piece of evidence, and that is the murder weapon. Law enforcement in Nevada is hoping by releasing new details they can find the person who murdered 37-year-old Vadim Kruglov. He's originally from Russia but was living in Washington state. He was an artist who helped build an art installation at Burning Man, according to his friends. The Pershing County Sheriff's Office just released his official cause of death. Deputies say that Kruglov died from a single stab wound to the neck. They also released an image of what the murder weapon looks like. I'll show you that in just a moment. And we'll talk about what it could mean in terms of the suspect, who they may be, what they were thinking, whether this was a planned murder or not. Let's break down how we got to this point before we talk about that, because I want to show you this video of what appears to be Vadim Kruglov drawing out the campsite, an art installation for Burning Man. One of his friends referred to him as a true hero of Burning Man, who is always ready to help others. A friend shared this video of him partying at Burning Man in the days before his death. Now, Kruglov was murdered on the night of August 30th, and it did take days for the local sheriff to identify him. Now, let me set the scene for you of how he was found and what investigators are working with as they try to solve what is really a mystery still at this point weeks later. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Burning Man, it's a lot to take in when you see pictures of it. It takes place at Black Rock City, Nevada, and you can see it's in the northwestern part of the state, very rural, desert part of Nevada. It's more than 2 hours north of Reno. Now, when we zoom in on Google Maps, you can see this kind of half moon shape. That's the temporary camp city that roughly 80,000 people build every year around Labor Day for Burning Man. It's an arts festival. It lasts 9 days leading up to Labor Day, and people get together, they wear costumes, they party, they celebrate art and culture. Now, the climax of the event is the burning of the man, which is an art installation that is set on fire. This is a picture of it from a previous event. The Pershing County, Nevada Sheriff's Office said on Saturday, August 30th, around 9:14 that night, as the man was just beginning to burn, deputies were waved over by festival goers who say that they found Kruglov in a, quote, pool of blood on the ground. Now, deputies say they interviewed people in the immediate area, they gathered evidence, and they blocked off the part of the temporary camp city where Kruglov was found. Now, it wasn't until a couple days later that law enforcement announced that he was the victim. The medical examiner said they identified him through fingerprints. Now, before he was identified, his friends had posted pictures of him on social media saying that they had lost sight of him and that he was missing. Now, as we're trying to piece together exactly what happened and who law enforcement may have spoken to, The Hollywood Reporter spoke to a woman who said that she was at the party that Vadim Kruglov went missing at, and she helped notify authorities. And she said as they were leaving Burning Man, they saw a woman flag them down. And this is what she said, quote, "We left, and on our way out, a woman flagged us down, and we opened the window, and she was very calm, and she said to us that someone in her tent was bleeding out and might be dead." She said the woman told them that they didn't want to touch Vadim. Now, investigators may have a lot working against them in this case, but it does appear not only do they have a witness like that who maybe they spoke to, but also perhaps the most critical piece of evidence is the murder weapon, and they say they have that. This is the image that was put out by the Pershing County Sheriff. They say that this is not the exact weapon that was used, but it's exactly what it was. It's an image from Google. It is a green butcher's knife. It makes me think of something like someone would take to go camping. In working on this story, we searched Vadim Kruglov's name on truthfinder.com, and what came back was an address for Tacoma, Washington, as well as Brooklyn, New York. It also appears he's only had one other interaction with law enforcement. It was a speeding ticket in Ohio. But other than that, his record was clean. At Law&Crime, we partner with Truthfinder and we use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great resource to give you some peace of mind, as it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now to break this down is Joseph Scott Morgan, professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. Thank you for taking the time, as always, to be with us.
You bet, Chris.
On Law&Crime. You're a great person to talk to about this now that we see the murder weapon that law enforcement says was used in this murder at Burning Man. What sticks out to you when you look at that picture?
It's green.
Right.
This is not, how Chris, how long have we been talking about the Idaho 4? And we've heard about K-bars and this sort of thing. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about one of these kind of neon-colored kitchen knives. It's what it looks like to me, at least, that many people around the country have in a block on their kitchen counter. You can buy them at you can buy it at any big box store, and I think you can get multiple colors. This tells me, and the knife itself, just so folks understand, it looks like the type of knife you would use for like chopping onions or something like that on a cutting board. Is essentially it's a rather robust knife. It looks to me like a weapon of opportunity or a weapon of convenience. It's not like somebody put an effort in to go to a sporting store, a sports goods store, to go purchase like a hunting knife, a survival knife, or anything like this. This is just something you're going to have in your kitchen. And why would you need that there unless, at Burning Man they have campers, right? And they have tents set up and this sort of thing, and people kind of live there or squat there for, a period of time. If they're prepping meals, this is something that would be easily accessible and traceable.
Right, and I was thinking too, like to your point, I mean, this is kind of a giant campsite that people are at for Burning Man, and there's no restaurants or anything like that. So it's the cheap kind of knife that you can buy that you might bring with you camping, as opposed to if you went to Burning Man with a plan to take this victim out.
Right.
I don't think a hot green knife would be probably the type of weapon that you would see. What type of evidence can you take off of something like this?
Well, that's the rub here, I think, because first off, you have to take kind of a broad view of this. This is such a dirty, disorganized environment out there, and the knife was allegedly found there at the scene. Who's touched it? What kind of surfaces has it come in contact with? The knife itself, if this was done like in an indoor location, like if you and I were working a homicide, say in an apartment somewhere in New York, we walk in and there's this hot green knife laying on the floor, you can say that unless somebody wiped it down, there's a high probability you're going to be able to get potentially latent prints off of it, because it's not just the handle, it's also the blade, if the hand touched that. Also DNA as well, you would think. And I'd be really interested to know, is there a commingling of blood in any way, like where you have the victim who is known and has now been identified? You would obviously have some biological elements from that individual. And then was the person that perpetrated this, was their DNA on the blade or the handle as well, not just fingerprints? And so you've got these two, put them together, and if you can establish that they were actually there together, what was their relationship prior to, well, let's just say prior to even Burning Man? Had they known each other before? And was there any kind of argument? Was there any kind of problems that had arisen when you're living in this kind of communal environment?
Well, and I think of the cause of death that's officially been released. And I remember when he was first identified, that they had said that they had identified him through fingerprints. And I thought, just with what the information that was out, that it was kind of, morbid to say, but like an overkill type situation because they said he was in a pool of blood. And so it actually turns out being that it was just one stab wound to the neck.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about, I guess, what can you take away from it just being one stab wound is the way that ended up killing Vadim Kruglov?
Yeah, good point, Chris. Most of the time when we are talking about sharp force related injuries, many of the cases that we cover are going to be what is deemed as overkill, as you mentioned, because it's very intimate. You've got two people going at each other, or one person that's attacking the other, and they're stabbing over and over and over again. That implies a lot of passion, a lot of hatred, those sorts of things that can be wrapped up. If you've got a single stab wound, I'm kind of fascinated by that dynamic. I mean, what happened? Was it get away from me, stabbed him one time, dropped the blade, and then walked off or disappeared into the crowd? Was it simply somebody that was really skilled with a knife? Why they would choose a green kitchen knife, I have no idea. And then they just know exactly anatomically where to stab somebody. Was there any drug involvement here? And when I say drug involvement, I'm talking about, were there any mind-altering substances that were on board with the victim and potentially with the individual that perpetrated this, and their reality was not reality, that it was influenced by whatever drugs they may have had on board. And that's certainly something to consider here.
And I think, too, of the situation with where Kruglov was found, because it's late at night. You have the man burning, which is like that big structure that they burn at the end of Burning Man, and he's in this pool of blood. And if you're a deputy, you could come over the place, and you have tens of thousands of people. Yeah. There's really no light. There's no cell service. How could that environment impact a body? Assuming that he had just been killed, since the pool of blood seemed to be fresh at that point. I mean, in terms of the evidence you have, it just seems like a very difficult environment to find a body and then try to grab evidence off of it.
Let's see. If I were to present this in one of my classes at Jack State, to like my crime scene class, the caveat would be, this is worst case scenario.
Yeah.
All right. Or one of the worst case scenarios you can have, where you've got a lot of traffic that's moving through a specific area. We do things like, you see it on the news even, and in media, where we set a perimeter. Where are you going to set the perimeter here? Is it just this immediate area? Is there a blood trail leaving away from the body? Was somebody saturated in blood? Well, I don't know that you could really pick up on that, particularly given kind of the dirt surface that's surrounding the area. And then the burning man that happens that night, that signals the end of this event. Well, I had heard that there were much fewer numbers than in past years, but still, you're talking about 70,000 people approximately. They're all in the wind at this point, Chris, and they come from all over the world. So if somebody from some other country, if this is one of their bucket list things that they want to do, to go out in the middle of the wilderness like this, or in this wasteland, and enjoy themselves, once they're on the road, and once they've removed themselves and they've gone on somewhere else, where are you going to source the data from? And not everybody knows one another there. You've got a commingling of strangers that are there as well for the first time. So you don't know how those interactions are going to go. Then just merely the processing of the scene. If it's dark, I've had cases where, I've had people walk immediately over bodies and not know that bodies were there because of darkness. And how much more so in an environment that is this packed in to this location, where you'll have people that will be, not intentionally, but contaminating the immediate scene. It's a nightmare for the investigators in a case like this.
I also think, too, just kind of tying very different case, of course, in Idaho, but the debate over the King Street house and whether or not, it should be demolished, and that, like, Burning Man is this temporary tent city that rises out of the desert. And then it disappears because people in their campers or tents or whatever, like, just drive away, and there's nothing left in this desert town. How much time do you need to be able to gather enough evidence, knowing that there's probably this timeline where you can't keep everything there for as long as maybe you would like.
Oh Lord, first off, you'd have to be Johnny on the spot, and here's another problem. Just from a logistic standpoint, this is isolated. The law enforcement people that are there, they might have some federal augmentation. Even that is going to be limited, particularly when it comes to people that actually process scenes. You can have people that work in security that are law enforcement but these are not the people that are going to be the evidence collectors. Where are you going to bring them in from, and do you have enough people in order to satisfy the need that the scene dictates with all of this delicate evidence that's out there? I mean, again, this goes back to worst case scenario where you're in this area of isolation. This is not like you're in a heavily, you're in downtown Atlanta or Detroit or New York or Dallas or wherever you want to say, where you've got these resources at your fingertips. Okay, you're talking about an isolated area where you're going to have to bring in, and now you're having to corral people. You can't corral 70,000 people and sit on them and say, we're going to get to all of you eventually. That's just not going to happen. And so I would imagine, particularly when this thing first started, that was one of the issues that they were looking at. Who do we go to? Who's going to be a primary source of information? Who are the closest people that he had with him? Did he show up in isolation? Is he a single, or did he come with a group of friends? I think that's going to be very important.
I think too, just looking at pictures, I've never been to Burning Man, but from pictures I've seen, you have people in costumes. So it's even if there's someone who remembers something of this guy was in like a wolf mask,
yeah,
who was in that mask? So it's like a whole other layer in trying to identify people that were around there. Like when you speak of worst case scenario, it just seems like one hurdle after another, and another being like a big part of Burning Man is no Wi-Fi, no cell service, like take in the experience, and then everybody's posting their pictures after. What type of resources does it take? And you used to work in Fulton County, and I mean, that's as big a county and the resources that go into solving crimes as anywhere in the country. But I think in this case, to effectively investigate it, I mean, what type of resources are you going to need for even just the digital part of it, as pictures from Burning Man are still coming in weeks later because people are getting back and getting their cell service and then loading things up?
Yeah, you begin to think about, things that we talk about like geofencing and that sort of thing to try to locate individuals that may have been near the victim. Did the victim have a cell phone? And one of the problems is that if you don't have cell service out there, automatically that resource is kind of defeated. So you're going to have to go back. I'm wondering, Chris, if perhaps as these images are loaded up, if biometrics might come into play here, where you're going to have some kind of AI facial recognition. If they can capture images, hopefully unmasked, of individuals that are approximating the victim, can they come up with a biometric match with anybody that may have been there? That you can go back and not necessarily accuse, but question and say, did you see anything? I mean, they're literally starting at ground zero here. That's a big piece to this. And also, what kind of resources do you need to properly process the scene in the immediate? Just the area around the body, who had access to the body. I think probably, kind of searching my mind about this, I'd like to know what the status of his body was relative to postmortem changes. How long had he actually been down? Was rigor beginning to set in? Was the body cool to the touch? Was there postmortem lividity, where the blood is settling? For all you know, he could have been dead for a protracted period of time or a very short period of time. And we don't have those answers yet, but that's going to be a big key into this. How immediate was this? And when they talk about blood pooling outside of the body, which, in fact, if you sustain a neck injury with a knife this size, I urge everybody to go look at the image of the knife, an individual will profusely bleed from this insult to the neck. So did he move around after he was stabbed, or did he immediately go down and bleed out right there? Again, if there were people approximating him when this happened, if you've got transfer blood on any of their clothing that were adjacent to him, those people are gone now. The clothing's gone now. You're not going to be able to get a relational, view of this and contextualize any kind of evidence that might have been on somebody else that issues forth from the body itself.
You just touched on this a little bit. I just thought about the statement "pool of blood," which is from the sheriff's office. He was found in a pool of blood, and that can be a very, what someone considers to be a pool of blood.
Yep.
You might think of it as different than maybe just a deputy responding to the scene saying it's a pool of blood. But if it's still in liquid, more of a liquid state, as opposed to having been in the desert where it might evaporate, you know the science certainly better than I do. But what does pool of blood tell you about when this could have happened if he was found? I think it was around 10 p.m. that night.
Yeah, well, pool of blood coming from a police officer, they would know, they would have a specific measure for that in their mind because they've got previous cases maybe they've worked domestics where people got popped in the nose, or they've had incidences where they've seen someone that was shot, or they were shot, and they know how much blood is going to come out of a body. Here's one of the problems, Chris. When you have a pool of blood on a dirt surface, you have this thing called absorption that literally it begins to drain off. Now you'll have a big kind of blood stained area, but if you're thinking like a puddle of blood, I don't necessarily know that unless there was some kind of underlying surface adjacent, like some kind of indoor-outdoor carpet or something like this, some kind of facsimile of a flooring that he may have been on, but indication right now is this is a dirt surface. Now you can get the outline of essentially where a pool was and get a parameter for that. This goes back to this initial question that I have, because sometimes when people are injured like this, they will kind of make a circle many times, and they're disoriented and they're trying to determine what to do. I've got blood coming out of my neck, I'm applying pressure, nothing is stopping it, and they're literally, it sounds very dramatic, but they're looking at their hands, they're going back, and they're dripping blood everywhere. And that's one of the dynamics that we look for at a scene. Is there any indication that he moved around or walked off, or that came from another direction and actually died there? That's another interesting point here. Was the knife actually left in his neck and he pulled the knife out? Again, another big question. And so because it's so convoluted, it's so very confusing, and it's so very isolated, I don't know that if many of these questions will ever be answered, Chris.
Yeah, and that leads to my last question, Joseph, is just, it's been 3 weeks. This happened August 30th. We're almost at October. What needs to happen in your experience when it doesn't seem like there are any leads? There's all these hurdles we've been talking about. Realistically, what would need to happen to break this case?
The knife is the key. The knife is the key. I hope that it was handled very, very carefully. I hope that no one else came in contact with it. I hope somebody had the presence of mind, a civilian, to say, stay away, don't touch that. We see the knife. They point it out to the police. The police correctly collect it, document it, and take it back to the lab ASAP for testing to look for any fragile biological evidence that might be on the surfaces of that knife. Secondly, they've got to get on these digital images that are arising out of this place. It's important that the victim's picture be posted everywhere. And if he's ever had any other visits to Burning Man or similar festivals, did he dress in a particular way? Get these images out there, and you might be able to make contact with somebody who's like, oh, yeah, I saw him, or I spoke with him, or whatever the case might be. Those are I think, in my estimation, the two pressing things right now that have to be done.
And we'll see how it plays out. But what a tough case. You
Yes.
talk about what a certainly you hope that it's solved. But for you and presenting to your students, what a challenge that would be as an assignment in class. Joseph Scott Morgan, always great to have you on Law and Crime.
You bet,
Thanks for
my
being
friend.
with us.
You bet. Thank you.
Now, we know that Kruglov was originally from Russia, and again, he was living near Seattle and in the Tacoma area. He had a previous address we also found of New York City. His friend shared a message from his dad in Russia. He grew up in Siberia. Here's part of what his dad said.
Он очень чувствовал несправедливость и отстаивал справедливость во всех проявлениях. Справедлив. Но я за
There is a GoFundMe that's raised tens of thousands of dollars to help send Vadim's remains home to Siberia to his family. Also, There's money being put out for information that could help solve this case. There's a group called Secret Witness that is offering $5,000 for information that could solve this mystery, as well as the Burning Man Project is putting out $5,000 as a reward as well. The Pershing County Sheriff also is asking for anyone with information or videos from Burning Man that could help in this investigation to come forward. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.